For breakfast this morning, I had razor soup. And I can't find Isaiah.
Isaiah 17:7.
Yes, I'm looking for.
I thought it was 15, the previous one.
I've got 12 marked, but I think that was like on this I'm in Mark, chapter 10, 30, 20.
Well, I'm actually trying to find the. Found it. All right, there we go. We'll see if we can get this to come up.
Oh, I transposed the numbers. It's Isaiah 14, verse 7.
Did you say 41? You wrote Isaiah 41?
No, I wrote 17.
I'm not sure there's 41 chapters in
No,
Isaiah.
I wrote 17:7. It's 14:7. I typed it wrong.
Yeah,
There's
okay.
two typos in the bulletin today. I know it. Well, I'll really have people lost online because I always tell them where we're starting in the subject line. So say where we are often today.
We are
14, verse 7.
all right. Well, let me get this going here. I believe we're good to go. If I can turn this on and hit this, we should get that. Okay. Which is all that we'll see there. It's just a backdrop for us more than anything else. And we will continue in our study of Isaiah this morning. We're in Isaiah. What did we say that was? 12, 14. I don't know how I flipped the pages again. We're in Isaiah 14. We got to Isaiah 7. But again, I'll probably do just a quick thumbnail sketch to get us from Isaiah 14:1 up to Isaiah 14:7 just for continuity. But before we do that, let's go to our Heavenly Father in prayer. Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Matchless is thy glory, matchless is thy wisdom, matchless is thy love. We thank you so much for the grace that you have offered us, though we do not deserve it. We thank you so much for the opportunity that we have to frame our existence in your love and your greatness, and to be with you in heaven one day. We thank you for the plan of salvation that you offered us, that you paid for at such great price with the life of your Son. We thank you so much for the creation that hinged on all that plan. We thank you for this great gospel that you've given us, Father, and the opportunity that we have to study it and to apply it to our lives and to strengthen us and guide us that we may be able to take your light to the rest of the world which so desperately needs it. We thank you for the responsibility that you give us for working in your mission field and for helping to bring those to you that you might add to your kingdom. We know that the work that we do is not easy, but we ask that you continue to strengthen us as we do so. We ask that you bring us that measure of health which is in accordance with your will. We thank you so much for the wonders of this body with which we have been blessed. We thank you for the healing powers that you have given us through our body and through your providential protections. We thank you so much for the opportunity that we have to avail ourselves of the doctors and the nurses and the healthcare providers who continue to bring us to that measure of health. We ask that you be with us as we recover from our illnesses and recover from our surgeries or prepare for upcoming surgeries, as is the case of many. We ask that you continue to be with those who seek comfort at the loss of loved ones, and we have many in this community and in our family who are suffering from those losses as well. And we ask for strength and we ask for understanding. And we ask for the courage to continue to offer ourselves to you in service. We offer all these prayers in your blessed Son's name. Amen. So Isaiah 14, we started we saw that the Lord has projected the doom of Israel first, and then Judea, and also the doom of the Assyrians and the doom of the Babylonians as well, because God uses all nations to fulfill his will. But because they are fulfilling God's will does not mean that they are not going to escape the wrath of that comes to them from bad behavior. And so he's telling these people that though you may be doing my will, your day is coming. And we get to 14, and of course he has said that they will go into captivity in Babylon, but he also says that he will return them as they will, a remnant, that they would get rest. And rolled into this promise that they will be returned is also promise of a Redeemer, a Messiah, a Savior. And that promise of redemption will extend to all those who would be added to the kingdom of heaven throughout history. And so he says that there shall be a rest and there shall be a joy. In verse 4, he says, thou shalt take up this proverb against the king of Babylon and say, how hath the oppressor ceased? The golden city ceased. The Lord hath broken the staff of the wicked and the scepter of the rulers. He who smote the people in wrath with a continual stroke, he that ruled the nations in anger, is persecuted, and none hindereth. And of course, what he's referring to here is the rapid invasion, almost without opposition, and so quick they were unable to resist it, as that invasion that Babylon suffered at the hands of the Medo-Persians. And the promise of rest in verse 7, and that rest, remember, coming from Cyrus, who had been named 150 years before by Daniel, who would return or repatriate that portion which would come to Judea, as it were. And it's interesting to note that whenever God said that he had held Cyrus's right hand, that he had protected Cyrus. There's a story there, and I'll tell you that story someday. He was actually protected as a child, as an infant, he was protected by from his grandfather, who really actually sought his death, and actually imprisoned his mother while she was pregnant, so that he could take the child from his mother and murder it. This did not happen through divine intervention. And Cyrus was protected, and Cyrus returned, and as a result of that providence of God, Cyrus freed the Judeans, or freed the children of Israel to return to Jerusalem, to restore Judea, to restore the temple, and to continue to protect and provide for the bloodline of Jesus Christ. And so we get to verse 7, and we see this promised rest. And so if someone would like to start to read Isaiah 14, verse 7 for me, read for me, please, down to 11. Down to 11.
The whole earth is at rest and quiet. They break forth into singing. Yea, the fir trees rejoice at thee, and the cedars of Lebanon saying, since thou art laid down, no fellow is come up against us. Hail from thee is moved for thee to meet thee at thy coming, and stirreth up the dead for thee, even all the chief ones of the earth. He has raised up from their throne all the kings of the nations, and they shall speak and say to thee, art thou also become weak as we? Art thou become like unto us? Thy prompt is brought down to the grave, and the noise of thy loud. The worm is spread under the tree, and the worms cover.
The worm is spread under thee, and the worms cover thee. A reference to the demise, the fateful end of the power of the Babylonians, likened to a person who is now in the grave, moldering in the grave, and the worms are now consuming the flesh. They had made so many enemies at one point that nobody would come to save them, and so it's like the earth swallowed them up. It was so quick. So they talk about hell from beneath, Sheol, the pit that has come up to thee. They haven't fallen into the pit. The pit has reached up and swallowed them. Now that's interesting. And so there's great rejoicing at their fall. In verse 8, he says, the fir trees rejoice at thee and the cedars of Lebanon. Now he's not talking about trees singing out. He's talking about the fact that the peoples who had been oppressed, the nations that Babylon had subdued, are now standing up because there is no feller, as they call it, no woodcutter to come and hew them down anymore. Babylon is gone. And the Medo-Persians and the rule of the Medo-Persians was a completely different type of rule. And all shall speak and say unto thee, art thou also become weak as we are? Art thou become like unto us? Remember that Israel, whenever they were sent into captivity, had become a hissing among the world. And that lesson, which was given to us throughout history so that we would learn. And now that hissing has been redirected against the Babylonians themselves. And then we look at what I consider to be a prophetic mumbling as toward the coming of the Messiah and the defeat of Lucifer. Evil will always lose in the end. And that's important to note. Those who seek to elevate themselves above God will meet with an untimely end. So let's read 12 through 16 as well, please.
How art thou fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of the morning? How art thou cut down to the ground, which didst weaken the nations? For thou hast said in thy heart, I will ascend into heaven, and I will exalt my throne above the stars of God. I will sit also upon the mount of the congregation in the sides of the north. I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. I will be like the Most High. Yet thou shalt be brought down to hell, to the side of the pit. And they shall see thee, shall narrowly look upon thee, and consider thee, saying, is this the man that made the earth to tremble, that did shake kingdoms, that made the world as a wilderness, and destroyed the cities thereof, that opened not the house of his prisoners?
Okay. Yes. So now there's two people. There are really two Babylonian kings that are being mentioned here when they talk about this. And it's a sort of a sarcastic question. He says, thou hast said in thine heart, and he says how thou hast fallen from heaven, O Lucifer. And this is actually a double entendre here in a way, because when he talks about Lucifer, he's talking about that man who works under Lucifer's seduction, if you will. And he's talking about Nebuchadnezzar. And you remember that that Nebuchadnezzar had actually thought to be worshipped as a god. And because of that, God told him that you're not only going to be not worshipped as a god, you're going to basically live like an animal in the field. And so he went crazy. He says I think they said for seven years, but remember that was probably figuratively speaking, not literally speaking, as long as it took for him to get the message. And so he basically went crazy. And he wandered around the fields, and his hair got long, and his nails got long. He lived like an animal. He ate the grass in the field until he came to his senses and came back. and realized that God raised and God brought down nations, and that every ruler ruled at God's pleasure or with God's tolerance, and that he was fortunate to be the king. And then, of course, his son or his grandson or his nephew, Belshazzar, forgot those lessons. And then Belshazzar was brought down to hell, brought to the sides of the pit. And everyone started to look, it basically offer sidelong glances at Babylon and say, is this the man that made the earth to tremble, that did shake the kingdoms? How quickly he had fallen. Without so much as a whimper, that nation had fallen to the Medo-Persians. So those that had destroyed the destroyers. Remember how terrible the Assyrians were. And then Babylon beat down Assyria and destroyed Nineveh completely. All the kings of the nations, even all them lie in glory, every one in his own house. There are none greater. The satraps and the princes of the Babylonian Empire were all overthrown. As a matter of fact, they were all in one place when they were overthrown. Not only did Belshazzar die, but those princes and those kings died as well. The entire head of the Babylonian government was chopped off in one fell swoop in one fateful evening. And so we look at verses 18 through 23. We'll go ahead and read them as well.
All the kings of the nations, even all of them, lie in glory, every one in his own house. But thou art cast down of thy grave like a young branch, and as the raiment of those that are slain, thrust through with a sword, and go down to the stones of the pit. A carcass trodden under feet. Thou shalt not be joined with them in the burial, because thou hast destroyed thy land and hast slain thy people. The seed of evildoers shall never be in thine own. Prepare slaughter for his children, for the iniquity of their fathers, that they do not rise, nor possess the land, nor fill the face of the world with cities. For I will rise up against them, saith the Lord of hosts, and cut off from Babylon the name, and the remnant, and the son, and the nephew, saith the Lord. I will also make it a possession for the bitter and the pools of water, and I will sweep it with the bosom of destruction, saith the Lord of hosts.
The besom of destruction, it's a word that means broom, a sweeping tool. I will make it a possession for the hedgehogs and turn it into a swamp, and I will sweep with it sweep it with the brooms of destruction, saith the Lord of hosts. Prepare slaughter for his children, verse 21, for the iniquity of their fathers, his children, not only his children, that's also a reference to all those who were laboring for the administration of the Babylonian kingdom. I referred to that just a few minutes ago. They were all destroyed in one fell swoop, leaving the nation without any leaders. It amazes me that the king of Babylon felt so secure that he could pull all of his leaders in from all the regions of his country and leave them exposed, thinking somehow that they would not, that vacuum, that void. And remember that whenever he brought them to him, they didn't just come for a weekend getaway. They traveled great distances, and when they got there, they stayed for weeks, months, away from their princely domains. And of course, that left the gates wide open for lesser men to be bribed, to be cowed into looking the other way while the Medo-Persians came in, to betray their leaders. It probably says as much for the way that they administered and the way they treated their people as it does anything else, that those people did not resist or send any warning whenever they got news that their country was being invaded. They may well have thought, well, anything's better than what we've got now. So we're looking here at a description of the fall of Babylon and the demise of the entire royal family as well. And in fact, many royal families. And there are a whole series. The next verses continue to follow with burdens or prophecies of doom for the nations which have either invaded Israel or have aided those who would invade Israel and have sworn enemies of the children of Israel. And so we will see that as well as we look at the following verses. So let's read verses 24 through 27. That specifically deals with the fate of Assyria.
The Lord of hosts hath sworn, saying, Surely as I have thought, so shall it come to pass, and as I have purposed, so shall it stand.
Okay, so let me interrupt here. The word of the Lord will never return empty. God says it will happen, it will happen. We don't need, and that word continues on. They remember that whenever they were prophesied they were going to spend 70 years, there were some false prophets who were saying, no, it's only going to be a few years and everything will be fine. We'll be back again. Don't worry about it. Well, they were wrong. And so people tend to try to say, well, never mind that Christ said that the end shall come as a thief in the night. Nevertheless, we still can look for the signs and we can still be prepared for it. So we don't have to be ready at this exact instant. We'll see the signs coming. Let's get ready. Well, we need to be ready now. Okay? So the same thing happens. We find that somehow people think that they can reinterpret what God says. And somehow by their reinterpreting it, it will somehow influence God to change his mind. All right, continue on. I'm sorry.
And I will break the Assyrian in my land, and upon my mountains tread him underfoot. Then shall his yoke depart off them, and his burden depart off their shoulders. This is the purpose that is purposed upon the whole earth. And this is the hand that is stretched out upon all the nations. For the Lord of hosts hath purposed, and who shall? His hand is stretched out, and who shall turn it back?
Yes, the Lord of hosts has purposed it. If God has set the purpose, if God has set the plan, who is more powerful than God that can disannul it? That can say, no, never mind. Don't worry about that. And his hand is stretched out, and who shall turn it back? God is saying, I'm in charge. Assyria thought they were in charge, and Babylon invaded Assyria, then invaded all the lands, particularly the lands of Palestine, the land of Canaan, the land which was Samaria at that time, as well as the lands of Judea. And so the Assyrians were cast aside and cast down. And now the Babylonians have been cast down by the Medo-Persians. And eventually the Medo-Persians, although their demise will not be quite as disastrous and catastrophic as this, will lose their power as a result of unsuccessful confrontations with the Greeks. So for now, he's going to talk about Palestine, the next things that come up. He's talking about King Ahaz. And this is a look back on Ahaz. Somewhere around 720 BC, these verses 28 through 32 are being prophesied here by Isaiah, the coming demise of Ahaz. And let's hear what Isaiah has to say about the demise of Samaria. Verses 28 through 32.
In the year that King Ahaz died was this birth. Rejoice not, thou whole house, because the rod of him that hath smote thee is broken. For out of the serpent's root shall come forth a cockatrice, and his fruit shall be a fiery flying serpent.
Okay, so it's that fiery flying serpent that he's talking about here. This is quite prophetic in nature. The year that King Ahaz died was this burden, a burden being a prophecy of doom. Something it's called a burden because the prophets really didn't get a great deal of pleasure out of speaking these things. There was no joy in it. They did it because God said, you're going to tell them this. In fact, there were many times, look at Jonah, and how he really didn't want to go and prophesy that burden. He didn't want to go into the mouth of the Ninevites, the Assyrians, the ones that killed people and skinned them alive and hung their skins on the walls to terrify people. And he was going to walk up to Nineveh and go, no, God says your end is coming. He didn't want to do that. That's a burden. And this burden is also something that Isaiah has to carry. And so he talks about Palestine, the rod of him that smote thee is broken. He's talking about Tiglath-Pileser of Assyria, the one who defeated the nation of Israel, the northern kingdom, and took them into slavery. Remember that he took all those people and pulled them out and put other peoples in their place. That smote thee is broken, for out of the serpent's root shall come forth a cockatrice. Out of the serpent's root shall come forth an adder, an asp, okay? A poisonous snake. And his fruit shall be a fiery flying serpent. Now this is an interesting prophecy, because guess what is on the banner of the Babylonian army that invades Assyria and defeats Assyria and slides in and takes over and absorbs Samaria and later on Judea as well. Their banner, their battle banner, carried on it a dragon, a fiery flying serpent.
And the firstborn of the poor shall feed, and the needy shall lie down and save. And I will kill thy root with famine, and he shall slay their men. Now that day, cry, O city, thou whole Palestine, art thou dissolved, for there shall come from the earth north a smoke, and none shall be alone in his appointed time. What shall one then answer, the messengers of the nation? That the Lord hath founded Zion, and the poor of his people shall trust in it.
That's God's sole purpose, to found the new Zion. The new Zion. The poor of his people shall trust in it. Those poor being those who understand that without God they have nothing, they are nothing. And so they learn to trust in the Lord. And so he's saying that all of Palestine, the northern part of the kingdom, and also the southern part, which is the southern part of Palestine, which has been taken over by Assyria and now will be taken over by Babylon as well, telling Palestine that Babylon, you're going to be absorbed by Babylon. You're going to be invaded by Babylon. The firstborn of the poor shall feed, the needy shall lie down in safety, and I will kill thy root with famine, and he shall slay thy remnant. What the famine did not take, Babylon took afterwards.
Has there ever really been dragons?
I'm not sure. I would tend to say that there may well have been dragons at one time, whether they were something that existed before the flood, for instance, or not. But we do know that there are, for instance, there's an insect called the bombardier beetle, which has the ability to mix chemicals as it shoots them out of its abdomen. And they come out, the chemical reaction creates a searing, boiling, hot liquid. They literally manufacture a napalm that will burn severely. So if God can make a bombardier beetle, I'm reasonably sure God can make a dragon. Again, the fact that we don't see dragons now doesn't mean that they are anything more than a myth. Because we don't see miracles either, and yet we believe in miracles. So, in my personal opinion, there are too many representations of dragons for there not to be some basis of fact at some time. All right. I've lost my place.
It's kind of the same with dinosaurs.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. The dinosaurs lived. The dinosaurs lived prior to the flood for sure. It may well have been that the dinosaurs, lived even after that. We're not 100% sure that some kind of a dinosaur was not on the ark. We certainly see that there are references made, particularly in Job, to dinosaurs. There's a description of a dinosaur there. And it's interesting to note that description of the dinosaur is also coincident with men. But we don't see dinosaurs now. But we also misunderstand, certainly the scientific community, because they deny the flood, deny that type of catastrophism, it makes it possible for them to deny that dinosaurs and men coexisted with each other. Because the flood did some very strange things to the way that these animals were accumulated. Remember that there were animals in the sea which also were consuming carcasses as well. So we just don't know what we don't know about the way that God has reshaped this earth. We think we know. We examine evidence and we come up with ideas, and then those ideas skew our view in such a way that we bend over backwards to try to come up with more and more evidence and fabricate it, if you will, misinterpret it so that it supports our theories. That's not how science is supposed to work. That's why so much of our science today is really junk science. And that's a sad thing. So we've looked at Palestine and we see their burden. We see that they are going to be absorbed as well. And there's a direct reference to Babylon here. And then we look at Moab. Remember that the Moabites are down south. Okay? But just because they're so far to the south and so far to the southeast of everything else that's going on does not mean that they're going to escape. And so this is Isaiah's prophecy of Moab in verse 15. Well, let's read through verse 4.
Because of the Moab is laid waste and brought to silence, because of the terror of Moab is laid waste and brought to silence. He has gone up to Bethel and to Dibon, and the high places to weep. Moab shall howl over Nebo and over Medeba, and on all their heads shall be baldness, and every beard cut off. In their street they shall wear themselves sackcloth on tops of their houses and in their street, and everyone shall howl, weeping abundantly. And Heshbon shall cry, and Eliah, their voice shall be heard even unto Jahaz. Therefore the armed soldier of Moab shall cry out, his life shall be grievous unto him.
Okay, so now that's the first 4 verses here. We've seen 9 cities that are named in Moab that are going to fall as a result. So, I mean, he's being very, very detailed in this. Remember that David had used Moab for slave labor at one particular point in time. He's referring to Nebo. He's referring to that mountain range on the eastern side of the Jordan River where Moses was allowed to look down on the promised land, but was not allowed to enter. And then Isaiah mourns, verse 5 through 9.
My heart shall cry out for Moab. His fugitives shall flee unto Zoar. And heifer of 3 years old, about the mountain of Luhai, where weeping shall they go up, shall go it up, the way up.
Horonaim, yeah, these words are strange.
They shall raise up a cry of destruction.
Okay, so he's basically outlining the whole of Moab. And there's an image that's drawn here. His fugitives shall flee unto Zoar. What do we remember about Zoar? Whenever God destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah, and Lot and his wife and his children fled, where did they go? They went to Zoar. So there's an image of people fleeing destruction here. The waters of Nimrim shall be desolate, the haze withered away, the grass falleth, there is no green thing. They're talking about stripping the land dry in their conquest to feed basically their armies as they go. Verses 7 through 9, please.
Therefore, the abundance that hath gotten, and that which they have laid up, shall they carry away to the brook of Philistine. For the cry is gone around about the borders of Moab, and howling thereunto Ekron, and the howling thereof unto Bethraim. For the waters of Dimon shall be full of blood. I will bring more upon Dimon, lines upon him that escapeth of Moab, and upon the remnant of the land.
So the Moabites have fled. They've taken everything to the Brook of Willows. They've taken anything they could, and they've run to Moab. They've run to Edom. Okay? They're going to Eglan, and they're going to Beer Elam. That's in Edom. Okay? Esau is Edom. The land of Esau is where they are now. And so they fled to Esau, but the waters of Dimon shall be full of blood. They will cross over the waters, and I will bring more upon Dimon, and lions upon him that escapeth the Moab, and upon the remnant of the land. They chase them into Edom and will overcome Edom as well. The whole region is going to be defeated by the might of the Babylonians. And so we will take up chapter 16 next Sunday as we start to look at a continuation, basically, of the prophecy of the doom of Moab and the plight of the people thereof. So we're right in the middle of this burden against Moab, and we'll take this up next Sunday morning for our study. Are there any questions before we break? I thank everyone for their attention, and we will meet at the top of the hour for our Sunday service. Thank you.